All right, welcome prehistoric art. This is where we're finally getting into the artwork. Now I will be showing you images in these notes that really have condensed down what is in the book. I'm trying to give you the most important information as I see it. Not that my bias is omnipotent, but I guess in this class it is. However, use these notes for the quizzes and for the test. This is my way of condensing things for you, so that way, you can read the book all the way through. But I'm trying to make it accessible for as many students as possible for the information I provide. So this is where all your tests and quizzes are going to come from. So use these notes, okay? Now, prehistoric art, we're going to have it divided in the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, right? Uh, and so basically Old Stone Age and New Stone Age. And with that, we're going to be looking at the oldest art that we know of, and then move into some very popular pieces. Now, I have a lot of videos for you guys on the links in the shell, but the most important one is the movie called Cave of Forgotten Dreams. And you can locate that in the Helena College Library, or you can find that to the link that I provided. Sometimes the links go down, so the DVD is there. You can also rent it through Netflix or Amazon if you wanted to pay for it. It's an excellent documentary, and it's the only documentary that is of this of Chauvet Caves. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So if you want to watch that film first and then come back to this, that's great. If not, we can roll through this and then go through it. So prehistoric, is referring to a time before we had a lot of, or any writing, right? There is no written language that's going on, right? We're kind of in the dark about what is going on with humans in this period. Now we have these artifacts, but we don't have anything that's definitive. Okay, so that's why we're calling it prehistoric. This makes it a lot harder as historians because there is no real conclusion about what's going on with the imagery and the tools and their meanings and everything that we have associated with newer art that we know from so many primary sources what was going on. But this is where you guys, as art historians, really get to bring in your own opinions and conjectures about it, because, yeah, it's sort of a toss-up. Even experts still debate a lot of this stuff. So, yes, when we think about the oldest artwork, cave paintings are the things that jump to mind, right? You can just imagine sort of an early humanoid inside these caves and just sort of making images, right? Whether we think of whatever they're viewing, or maybe we're thinking of religious ways, but that always comes to mind. There's a few other things though. So I'm going to be showing you not only cave paintings, but I'm going to be showing you sculptures, and really the most important of some of those images in cave paintings come out. So our understanding of this is relatively new. The earliest discoveries started to come out around 1870s, and in Spain and in France, these early caves were found. In Spain was the oldest at first, and Altamira, and that one is open. There's also Lascaux Cave, and that one is open, so you can go visit these. But the oldest is at 40,000 years old. Now, we found tens of thousands of objects ranging in Africa, Asia, Australia, but most of them, a lot of them have been found really in Europe, around Spain, Italy, France, into Germany, right in that pocket, right around the Mediterranean, just north of the Mediterranean. And a lot of this, of course, is because of food sources and such. So we know that humans are sort of gathered in this area at this time. These artifacts are usually found out of things that have a little bit more permanence to them. So the older they are, yeah, it's things like stone, or bone, ivory. But whether it was wood or something that's decayed over time. So there's a lot of pieces really that are missing, I guess is what I'm trying to say in all this. So we're trying to still put all these pieces together. Now, let's get into cave painting because, yes, being the obvious, in 1878, Altamira, and there's a movie, actually a more recent movie now, I think Antonio Banderas is in it, and it's about this cave being discovered, but sort of like an amateur geologist and daughter go in, and she's the one who found these paintings, and they had never been really sort of seen or documented before. So there was a lot of speculation when this cave was found, like, what were these just kids that had come in here and graffitied? What is it that we're really looking at? And it was through a lot of research they found that, wow, no, these things are old, right? So 14 to 12,000 BC, and BCE, if you're using that. And what we're seeing here is not really just an amateur portrayal, right? These animals have a life to them. Stylistically, the way that they are done and colored and outlined, they show detail, to the point where a lot of experts have been able to sort of categorize a species, or they've been able to, of course, find skeletons that have matched up and realized that these aren't just some fantastical creatures, that these sort of extinct, in this case bison, still were around. So and later gone to extinct. So a lot of things have been learned from them, from these images. But really the most important one, and all of this gets into sort of the cave of forgotten dreams, is in 1994, a cave called Chauvet Caves, the later called Chauvet Caves, was found. Okay, and so what's amazing is, being such a recent find, they were able to seal this off to preserve not only how much air and stuff was getting to it, but the human traffic and stuff. So very few people have ever entered this cave, and that's why that DVD comes in to be really important. But unlike Altamira or Lascaux, you just imagine your human breath, even in these places, that moisture condenses and it starts the decaying process. So, these things start to lose their color over time and such. So it's hard, but this has got something that's pristine. Now, how do they make these? Well, using natural ochres, berries, these pigments that you can just sort of find. It was usually mixed with a binder of some sort. If you know anything about pigments, they need a binder. So like in oil painting, that'd be linseed oil, or like gum arabic for watercolors and such. But in this case, since we're not understanding that, human saliva was one of the biggest ways of binding. So, and you're able to put the pigment in their mouth and spit like an airbrush. And so over here, you can see the hand print, but over here is sort of a diagram of how their hands would have been placed. And then you can imagine just sort of spitting over your hand again and again and again to create that airbrushing effect. So that what seems almost like very kindergarten-esque, dipping your hand in paint, putting it on there. That was one way. That gives you the positive image. And then if you wanted the negative image, you can do the airbrushing. Of course, charcoal, like burnt charcoal, like a stick, burnt, that'd be done. From your torches, you can get what's called lamp black, with that carbon, if you've ever seen that, like on the inside of a glass. Like if you've ever been camping and used a little kerosene lantern stuff, that lamp black that's in there, that's really well. That's a really good preserved carbon pigment that you can use. But Chauvet Caves gives us like the most intimate look at what's going on. And what's interesting is that most of these images that we're finding are in caves in the darkest parts, right? And that to me is very interesting and sort of telling to what's going on, is that here we are as an individual, and I just can't imagine in my mind being an early human And what are you thinking of the most, right? Food, shelter, right? And of course, making more people, right? And but you think about all the adversities that are out there. Why in the world would you stop to paint or draw, right? Like if you're worried about getting dinner, why would you paint? Why would you stop to do that? And let alone in this cave, and researchers know that it was visited over 5,000 years, right? We have these layers of drawings and layers of paintings. So that tells us something else, right? That there must be something ritualistic about this in many regards. Um, but they didn't live in these caves. So that's another sort of like telling, like, okay, well, we know they didn't live there because there aren't any sort of what we call trash piles. There's fireplaces, but there's no scattering of like bones that you could tell have been either uh, cut in with a knife or chewed on stuff. They can tell that from the bone fragments and such. So we have these sort of like really interesting, almost ceremonial type places, and in them is animals. I mean, we see animal depictions, which is also interesting that we're sort of. I mean, it's lots of different types of animals, but it's animals still nonetheless. There's very few little depictions of vegetation or even humans. So, why only animals? When we think of the human face, it's always been depicted. And it's usually one of the first things that is depicted in culture. So why do we not see any human faces in this? So I'm going to leave you with some of that as you watch that film. All right. Now, some interesting things that have arisen. I just talked about no human depiction, but we do, as we get later, and this one is in Lascaux Cave, so it's not as old, right? Chauvet Cave is the oldest and the oldest known artwork in our on our planet that we know of at 40,000 years old. So that's where we sort of set that mark and say, okay, art has been created for at least 40,000 years. And they do that from carbon dating and such. This being only 15 to 13,000 years old, um, being newer, right? We do have something that's more interesting here is that when you look at this image, we do have a humanoid sort of figure, right? And then we have this bird staff, as some have sort of located. We have, of course, what looks to be some sort of weapon, later known as sort of an atlatl. If you know anything about an atlatl, it's a wooden handle with a little notch in it, and that atlatl will then hold a spear, and you could fling it. And so we see that spear impaled this bison here, and these are supposedly its wound or the entrails coming out. Now over here, it looks to be sort of a rhinoceros at some point, and I do not know if those dots are supposed to be coming out near its butt, but anyway, it could. They could be documenting it very well. But this right here is sort of what we're focusing on, and what's interesting itself is the head, right? And usually we had what's called naturalism in art, which means we're just depicting the way we see it. There's not a lot of self-expression, and here though we see this departure from that. And when you look at this figure, some have speculated that maybe it's a shaman, or they're going in a trance sort of state. Some believe that there's something that could be an erection here that maybe lead to the idea that maybe this is more of a ceremonial practice. We do have this bird staff. Some think, well, maybe it's a bird with long legs. I mean, it's all the speculations going on. But this one really has us sort of confused. And I definitely suggest reading your book more about it, because it has the potential to maybe show a bridge in the human mind about what they're depicting and how they're depicting it. But what we do look at how the hairs on the back of this bison are standing up. So there's a lot of observation still going on, even in this character by this artist or whoever's doing this, to know, when these are wounded, like this is what's happening. So there's some emotion that's coming through. Now, it wasn't just paintings that were being created, right? We have carvings, we have sculptures. This one's is all from a mammoth tusk, and it is a standing sort of feline figure. So when we think of sort of the shaman and the part animal, part human there, we have kind of another representation of it again here. This being the oldest sculpture that we know at 38,000 years old, um, is really interesting, um, because of this standing posture. Now, yes, it's a piece of ivory, it's a tusk, and so it's going to be in sort of that form, that long cylindrical form. But so you think of like the arms and legs would just have to naturally do that. Maybe they didn't understand how to maybe drill or hinge and sort of put that out. But because of this sort of standing form, it maybe speculates us to believe, was this sort of a totem? Was this an item? It's very, very interesting on like what we can speculate with this. So I like to show this piece because there's a lot about it, and you can find more in the MindTap videos about it. Now, probably the most famous of these pieces that we know of has been called the Venus de Willendorf, or just Woman of Willendorf. And this little statue is actually pretty small, easily fit in the palm of your hand, and it was found in Willendorf, Austrian-German area, and it has a really interesting story being found in the site. But there have been many versions of this found, not that it was copied, so to speak, but similar Venuses, as we'll call them, because they could be symbols of beauty, throughout a lot of Paleolithic sites. And so what we're looking at here that links them specifically is when you look at this figure, you say, okay, well, we understand it's human, or human in features, but there are also features that are very highly stylized. Now, this massive stomach, some scholars would speculate that, I don't know if anybody would be that big at that time because food sources, right? Now, also here we have the enlargement of the breasts, and on top of that is actually the arms. They're actually resting on top of the arms. So once again, not necessarily possible, but that's what's being sort of overemphasized, as well as female genitalia has been added. So there's some details that are going on, and we can see anatomically sort of the knees and what have been the feet. The only thing that's really odd is sort of this head. Where is this hair? Is this a headdress? Is this a stylization? Did the artist screw up the face and just chisel it out with a bunch of textures? We don't know. But there's been a lot of other Venuses that have been found with this same sort of hyper stylization of female genitalia. And so these could be figures of beauty. They could be figures of fertility. Right, they could be, once again, totems or good luck charms, or going about that. But check out the YouTube video link that I provided there, and they're going to give you a really good breakdown of other Venuses that you get, so you can see the sort of the gamut of them. But talk a little bit about, like, from the beginning, we have always created notions of beauty. Right, we do know that there's got to be something about beauty with this, even if it's just linked to fertility. So knowing that gives us sort of this interesting segue into the human mind, that we've always tried to define, what is the most beautiful to us. Now, Neolithic art, newer art, right? It gives sort of a synopsis there of what's going on, and we have the Middle Stone Age, and the ice is finally melting. So with that, we have more movement, and with more movement, we have things like farming that's beginning to happen. We're seeing people settle down into settlements, and so with that, we're seeing some buildings. Now, the first major farming areas that we know of have been linked to the Fertile Crescent, which is between the Tigris and Euphrates River in Iraq. We're going to later study this, known as Mesopotamia. But those are the very first large settlements and the oldest ones that we find. And in there we can see sort of the agricultural roots. I'm going to show you some slides of a site called Gobekli Tepe, which actually means Potbelly Hill. And this is now a site that's become a major attraction, especially for archaeologists, because it's redefining what we think of when it came to our idea of human nature. So we thought sort of in the process of human technology that in order to have settlements, we needed to control agriculture. So the invention of agriculture allowed us to settle down. But this site is now the first site found that predates agriculture, but still has a massive settlement quality to it. So it's a large settlement that was definitely visited over a long period of time, but there was no agriculture at that moment. So maybe people were living in settlements before they had sustainable food sources. So anyway, I'm going to show you my own personal slides because I got to visit this, and this is in Turkey. And what's really cool about this, and I gave you some links for sort of the tour that you can go on, is that the site is still active, still being excavated. And so when you first kind of get to the top of this hill, you walk in and it's, sort of, you can look up here and you can see that they've built this sort of structure to sort of protect it from weather. And underneath there, you can start to see piles of stones that make up rooms and walls and such. And as you go more on this sort of boardwalk and scaffolding, you begin to see these pillars sort of emerge out of the ground, right? And these are these T-shaped pillars, and they are placed in an area that definitely would have been sort of roof supports. But on them, we see these engravings, right? And there's some fowl of some sort. Over here we have a boar. I believe that there's snakes on some, and scorpions and stuff. So they're engraving these things onto stones. Now these stones, once again, they begin to show us, well, they must have had some knowledge of tools. They must have known something about masonry, and then let alone their architecture, right? So it was really cool going and visiting this. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And in fact, it looks a lot like eastern Montana when you go to Turkey. There's lots of wheat fields and things around, but you have these early civilization mounds. And you can kind of dig through the dirt and sure enough find that these mounds were, whether discards of early human life or not, it's just amazing. Turkey has got so much history into it. But you can begin to see all these different carvings. And you can see, still trying to hold and brace that up now, but it would have been freestanding at the time. If you want to read some of the descriptions, I'm really amazed at sort of these animals and why, especially something what looks to be more like a crocodile, when those don't exist in Turkey. So that means that people must be traveling from greater distances. This bird too kind of has that same sort of shaman bird staff look to it. When we think of that other cave painting, and you can see sort of the layout on top of the hill and how here's that covered porch that you walk in and under. So it's a smaller site, but here's where they've gridded out and started their excavation of it, and it's still, taking place all over the mountainside as they continue to find more and more. Some interesting things. These were what they probably believe were cut into the stone to gather water and hold water. They have a little bit of irrigation going on. These are still really interesting. These have been hand drilled into stone, and there's hundreds of them all over the place. And they believe that these probably held tent stakes, like the center poles and stuff, tents. And so you could place in a beam, and then from there that would hold the canvas that can then be stretched out to others. But it's kind of interesting that you'd still make so many if there was already one there. So I was really intrigued, but you can kind of see way out on the landscape here what that looks like. Kind of reminds me of even like Billings area if you've gone out there. All right, and then of course the most famous of these sites is Stonehenge. Stonehenge, we know, was this really big mystery at first because these stones don't belong to the area. So they had to be brought in. They weigh several tons each. And being so old, they wonder, well, how did they move them? Where did they get them from? So there's a great movie I put there on your Moodle shelf for looking at it, but it it definitely is a grave site. Uh, it has the alignment to be with summer and winter solstices, which is very common within these early architectural pieces, that there was sort of a celestial aspect to them. They used a post and lintel system, which means just kind of like our door frames, right? You have two uprights held by a support beam in between. But how to hoist up that is even more remarkable because we're not finding any tools. There was a road nearby that was sort of carved in and into the dirt, so we know that there was some sort of access to it. And there's a site nearby that was like it served as a campsite, but this was itself was not like a living structure. It was used specifically for ceremonial purposes and has been changed over time, not by us recently, but by early humans and how they use this. And you want to check out that film because it goes in great depth about this. But they did find a lot of human remains that are around it, so maybe they were linked to some sort of royalty. But other than that, there weren't any objects with those human remains, right? There are no tools, there are no markings, there's nothing to really give us a sense of who really did this and why. But it then was visited over several hundreds and thousands of years, so there must be something going on, but it leaves us in a lot of mystery that we get to speculate. So these are the most important things that I want you to take away from this chapter. Please check out the films, and if you find sort of any gaps, what I want you to think of is that we don't know all of it, and we probably will never know all of it.